You, my guest, and my old friend from Tata Consultancy Services. Welcome you, Wan Dazri. Again, I'll say thank you very much. How are you?
No, good. Thank you. It's been a while. I'm here, so
It's glad
very-
to have you back here. And probably talking about the festive holiday season, Christmas, going into New Year. Definitely, we want to take a look from the business perspective. It's like sustainability, it's like giving back to the planet and future generations. A perfect theme, we can say, for the holiday season. And focus on the business perspective. How can they give back to the planet and society while ensuring their own long-term growth?
Yeah, thanks, Nina. I think when you talk about sustainability, I think the mind frame that we should take on this is actually, yes, one is actually that giving back. I think historically we know, a lot of conversation around giving back is around the corporate social responsibility, like CSR. But I think the mindset have to shift a bit, right? So it's no longer just about giving back, but the question is, how do you actually integrate businesses to do more good for the environment, to some extent society, and also being transparent about it, right? And maybe, the whole thing here also, businesses are prone, knowingly or unknowingly, to this notion of greenwashing, which is not something ideal, right? And that has a lot to do with education. So I think, in answering your question short, I think we need to move away from, the traditional concept of giving back, but rather how do you do business for good, like good to the stakeholders lah. It's not just about shareholder. Kalau dulu, I think, we talk about doing business, kind of profit maximizing dia. But now it's really about that stakeholder interest. It's not just about money, but also the society involved, the staff, the employees, the values, and also to some extent also the environment. So yeah, I think it's really about, how do you do business for good, proactively, and not just profit driven semata-mata lah.
Talking about not profit-driven, but we know that maintaining sustainability or integrating sustainability within the business framework is not easy, as it could cost a lot.
Yes.
What's your POV on this?
No, I think, again, right, I think the more progressive view about sustainability and ESG is really about long-term investment, right? You're right to say, short-term probably there will be more costs involved, right? In fact, if you want to promote sustainability practices, and I think one way that I could sort of share in Malaysia, so for example, TCS, we partner with Petronas, for example, and the idea behind that is actually we've created this sort of an incubator and accelerator to promote more, I guess, youth to do more impactful businesses or social enterprises. So what we are saying here is actually, look, it's not just about starting off a business for profit making, but it should have an equal impact for society, benefits, and also environment, right? So I think at Malaysia, I think we have done, we call it Social Enterprise Education Lab, where we partner with Petronas to incubate these businesses. I think there's about 12 of them, dari cohort 1, 2, and 3 now. And it's amazing to see that a lot of these youth, it's not just focusing on profiteering, but also some of them are working on social challenges. We're talking about, families with autism. We're talking about OKU, PWD, how do you get them into the inclusive business environment so that they can get employment with the big institutions, for example. And now we're seeing more into the, orang kata, agriculture. When we talk about securities, farmers punya livelihood, how do you make sure that there's enough when we talk about food? And the growing trend now we'll see is actually with regards to what we call the silver economy lah. The aging population, the aged care, right? So I think it may not be mainstream now, but you see a lot more, I guess, small businesses, small medium enterprises in Malaysia. I think we know the composition about 98%. The backbone of the economy is actually the micro, small, medium enterprises.
Right.
These guys are the one who would actually be big in the future. And I believe, if the right trajectory is given, I think there will be the mainstream of the future businesses, not just in Malaysia, but hopefully in region and so globally juga lah.
And that is our hope
Yes.
and our dream moving forward. Hope to be better, bigger, and as we enter the new year with New Year's resolution for businesses, aligning with the spirit of renewable during holiday season. How can integrating sustainability helps the businesses to stay relevant and competitive, especially for the backbone of that sector?
Yeah.
We can say the SME that has been boosting our economy as main.
I think that's a good angle orang kata, right? I think in Malaysia we're no lack of festive season, right? So lepas Christmas period, then you come the Chinese New Year, then the Raya and stuff like that, right? So that gives an opportunity for, I guess, brand first and foremost to position. But more importantly now, I think with sustainability, I feel it becomes like a market differentiator. It's no longer just about brand proposition, but it's also an opportunity for businesses to say, look, what else that I'm doing for the environment ataupun society, so that I resonate with what the market want, and pretty much the young generations now are more inclined to actually spend ataupun consume with ethical products. And this is what we call the conscious consumerism lah. And I'm not talking about the B2B sangat. I'm talking about just people like you and I. Kalau kita nampak cookies and whatever it is, right? More and more now, I think survey shows, I think the younger population, I think about 80% of them are inclined to buy brands who have significant impact to either the community or environment. Now that's great, right? We're talking about kalau global brands like Patagonia, for example, right? So it's no longer just about orang kata ethical sourcing, but it's also everything that have to do with the supply chain. Ethical sourcing is one, reducing wastage is one, community development also is another one, whereby they try to sort of do more training with the underprivileged, their staff, promote education and awareness and stuff like that lah. So if you are able to package that narrative, orang kata, and sell it into a pop-up shops, for example, in a way that is also educating the mass population in terms of, there's actually brands out there who is not just fast brand. Kalau kita talk about fashion, there's a lot on fast fashion, but it's also they're emphasizing on the ethical or the conscious sort of environment and society to it lah. And I think or rather in Tata Consulting punya lingo is the ESG lah, the environment, social and also governance is actually transparency lah. So I think it's a lot of opportunity in Malaysia, knowing that there's a lot of festive season. So then, the market differentiator is, yes, you put your brand out there, but how much more you are doing for the environment and society. That's important.
And talking about younger generations, the youth are more inclined towards sustainable product and services. But in a workplace, in a work environment, we know that we are working with multi-generations, baby boomer, Gen Z, Gen X, millennials, and each of the generation have their own mindset and even approach.
Yeah.
How can both of them work together, multi-generations, in terms of aligning their value, their method, and their approach to boost sustainability at workplace?
Yeah, I think that's a great question, and you're talking about multi-generations of stakeholder, let's put it that way. And in the corporate world or private sector world, I think a lot still in Malaysia, the decision maker is actually those young in the in the 40s, 50s basically, right? As much as they are the decision makers, sometimes also, and I'm glad to see this, right? A lot of the C-suite, for example, C-suite, whether they are chief sustainability officer, chief marketing officer, even the CEO themselves are re-educating themselves by engaging more with the younger generations. And likely, like it or not, because the younger generations, I guess younger population, especially in Malaysia now, and also regionally, are pretty much shaping the market demand now. And nak tak nak, you gotta
like it or not, you gotta adapt.
Re-educate and adapt in terms of, how do we sort of ensure that we're doing sustainability in the right way lah. And I think the market can actually educate themselves when they see red flags, for example, like, actually this is greenwashing. You'll be surprised to see, especially in the TikTok generations and stuff like that, where there's a false advertising around sustainability and consumer pick up on it quite fast,
Oh,
right?
okay.
So at my line of work itself in Tata Consulting Services also, we're trying to do more of an impact work alongside our, I guess, technology and delivery services lah. So what that means is actually, can we also leverage of using tech and digital, for example, to amplify more sustainable practices? And it could be many things. One is, could we evolve the way that companies or MNCs or GLCs of Malaysia to evolve their CSR practices to become more sustainable and amplifying more impact beyond the traditional way of doing CSR utamanya. And yang keduanya is actually educating our partnering stakeholders and clients jugalah. Outside of corporate world also, we have started to look into exploring working with sort of state governments as well. When we talk about environment sustainability, when we talk about SDG and stuff like that, one that I could share also, we're exploring very much with Sabah. I think Sabah is a lot of potential there with regards to sustainable practices, community development dan sebagainya. But also we know Sabah is actually one of the lower income state in Malaysia. So the question is, can we do more, right? And we're not talking about capitalism semata-mata, but we're talking about how do you empower the community? How do you leverage technology, for example, to amplify more impact with regards to biodiversity, ecotourism, and they're also doing more stuff in the digital space so that the community in Sabah, dia punya jurang pemisahan antara the urban and non-urban tu can be closed, right? And that's something that I think there's a lot of opportunity that we're trying to do beyond the consumerism, but also it's about trying to get state in this case to be strategic about considering environment when you talk about biodiversity dan sebagainya tadi, but also the society. How do you empower them? How do you elevate them from poverty? Can we use digital, for example, right? So that is something I'm excited about, especially in the Borneo part of Malaysia, and how we could sort of empower them jugalah, especially in this case Sabah, for example.
I like you take to a very large view, as we cannot only see the multi-generation within the company workplace, but also corporations or collaborative working together between cross-state, cross-agency, cross-minister, and even we can see the private and the public. And from all of this cooperation, there's always challenges, and also along the way there's opportunities.
Yeah.
And what some of the lessons that businesses can carry from 2024 to tone their strategies in 2025.
Yeah, I think it's interesting, multi-layered macam you cakap tadi. So I think one of the, if you look at key trends, I think when you talk about sustainability, a lot are still focusing on environment front. Which is great. I think in Malaysia, you'll see a lot of push around green technologies ataupun innovation. And I could, we all know this, right? So for example, Petronas, for example, have been investing a lot on renewables. Their target of net zero carbon, especially. So that's one. And you see another corporate Malaysia, like Malaysia Airlines, for example, have started to use SAF, Sustainable Aviation Fuels, in order to, again, about carbon emission and environmental fronts. Nestle in Malaysia also is a great example. I think by 2025 also they are looking at using more recyclable packaging for the likes of their Milo dan sebagainya lah. So all of these are in tandem with the global trends. Now, what would be key, I feel, is aligning what our domestic local players are doing with the international standard.
Okay.
And you mentioned a bit earlier about the framework, and we know this, right? So the Security Commission, Bursa, for example, have come up with a ESG and SDG framework. Yes, that's a great start, but again, aligning it to the larger
scale of the group.
Yes, the larger group. And we're not talking about small businesses, right? I mean, yes, small business we covered the MSMEs, about conscious consumerism, education. That's great. But we're talking about corporate Malaysia. When we talk about sustainable aviation fuel, net zero carbon, environment front, it has to be synergistic with whatever happens in the international market. Of which then it will make Malaysia also competitively in the sustainable space when we do, trading, for example. Later on, maybe we'll talk more about carbon trading, supply value chain, and things like that, right? So I think I'm cautiously optimistic for Malaysia. I think there's a lot of potential, but I think it has to be directed in a strategic way to be competitive. And I'm not talking about trading per se, but I'm talking about the sustainability punya front lah.
And talking about in the level of global context, and I might share some of data. This is from WEF. Maybe this is what happened in US. So one of advanced economies. We see 95% of G250 companies publish carbon targets, up from 80% in 2022, and 56% of G250 companies employ sustainability leaders compared to 45% in 2022, and 30% of G250 companies link sustainability to executive compensation. And there's a lot more numbers on that. Probably as a small and open economy as Malaysia, what can we learn from advanced and bigger economies, especially as they have more resources, more energy, more money to boost or promote sustainability? And what can we learn from other advanced countries and adapt within the local context?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. I think, and I'm covering multi-layered lah here. I think different approaches. So if you talk about the micro, small, medium enterprises segment, largely in the startup space, I think there's more fluid with regards to knowledge. For example, if startups coming to Malaysia, or Malaysian startups going abroad, for example, can have that best practices talent exchange, which is great. Yang kedua ni is with regards to the big players. When you talk about, the likes of our multinationals, for example, tadi, how do you either fit into the stats that you mentioned tadi, or conversely, there's a lot of opportunity in Malaysia that has room for these best practices. Sebagai contoh, I think in Malaysia, biodiversity is great, right? It could be underdeveloped comparatively to the Western countries. But, there's a lot of opportunities for us to do more here, leveraging on best practices, right? So what that fundamentally means is that and also because of all this globalization, there's a lot of opportunities to do that. Now, the only thing that I would encourage or probably look into is actually the policy side of things. How does government of Malaysia, for example, inculcate or provide more opportunities for these businesses, small, medium enterprises, or the big corporations, to do more of that? Now, hypothetically speaking, or illustratively speaking, is actually, how do you promote trade, for example? Vice versa, in the sense of kita go outside, outbound or inbound. When we approach foreign direct investments, for example, right? Can we also do that in the name of sustainability, right? We know for a fact, government are big in the sense of trying to push more data centers, AI and stuff like that. But we know also in Western countries, Google also are looking to do more with AI to promote sustainability, reducing use of energy, sebagai contoh. Can we also take that angle, for example, for the practitioners in Malaysia, right? And I think the only way to raise that profile, raise that awareness, is actually to certain government initiatives ataupun policies lah. We've seen a glimpse of this. For example, the use of EV, electric vehicles, for example. At one point in time, Malaysia was big, introducing incentives, taxes, and stuff like that, right? Keberkesanannya we won't discuss here, but I'm saying it's actually, can we use the same sort of approach and mentality, for example, to say, look, can we do more in Malaysia, outside in perspective, ataupun inside out? So that's something I feel we could do more of in Malaysia, knowing that what's happening in the market, not just locally, but also globally juga lah.
And talking about sustainability, giving back to the planet, during festive holiday season, many companies, or we can say business, will blast everything. Accessories, there's more, we can say the more the merrier, but we know that sustainability is operate all year long. So what kind of downside risks or challenges for business and key leaders to maintain or operate sustainability all year long after this?
Yeah, I think a lot of it has a lot to do with education, Bali, right? Because you're right to say, and I think now if you go into Netflix, there's a documentary called buy now.
By now,
Well,
correct.
by now, shopping conspiracy, basically, right?
Yeah, I watched that
Oh, you
documentary
watched?
actually. Yeah.
Yeah. So the more you consume, basically, the more you're doing negative externalities, like whether it's packaging and stuff like that, right? The problem again lies within the education, lah. But the good news, if we're going on the trajectory of the youth now who are looking into ethical products, ethical consumption, conscious consumerism, sebagainya, they are savvy in terms of knowing what products that they need to choose. Now, if you're a corporate and I'm extrapolating, right? So we know for a fact Malaysia next year, we're the chairmanship of ASEAN 2025, right? There'll be a lot on corporate gifting, maybe F&Bs, conferences, conventions, and stuff like that. Extrapolating from that, in 2027, SEA Games potentially will be in Malaysia also. Now you're talking about athlete merchandising, again, all of those stuff, right? There's an opportunity here again to educate masses, right? To educate the rakyat also to say, look, what is an ethical product? And how you spend your money. So, for example, for every ringgit you're spending, how much more you're giving to the community, right? Is it about unemployment, reducing unemployment with PWD, struggling single mothers and sebagainya? That is something that I feel brands can do more. Now, if I'm a corporate, knowing what is it there, right? The low-hanging fruit for me to do that is actually through what we call perolehan ataupun social procurement. If I really know there's brands out there who are very ethical, I guess in the case of Malaysia, there's a lot of social enterprises yang focuses on, yes, doing business, but also impact kepada community and the environment.
Correct.
Can I start off with them first? Can I procure goods from them? Can I procure F&B services from them, whether it's seasonal, festive, conferences, conventions, and sebagainya lah. By way of doing that, I think you'll see more and more Malaysians or small medium enterprises in Malaysia are looking into sustainability. And they are maybe replicating, emulating, but they're targeting certain communities in Malaysia that they are feel resonate more about lah. So I think that's probably the easiest, lowest hanging fruit if you're a big company in corporate Malaysia. Again, perolehan is not just about, who are the cheapest, but also what other value that I can probably provide by purchasing with these impactful brands or social enterprises and sebagainya. Yeah.
Probably you can share with us some of your probably successful case study. What can we learn from successful business that have turned sustainability into strength?
Yeah, so that's great, right? So I think TCS or Tata Consulting Services or Tata Group as an ethos, we're not very into profit making sangat. And to be honest with you, our model, right, 60% of the profits that we do, will go back to the community, whether it's through philanthropy. We invest a lot in healthcare. Back in India, with all our group profits, right? What that essentially means, our DNA tadi, is not just about profiteering, but also giving back to the community. And you probably know in India, I think there's a lot of populations that require support, or rather empowerment. I'm not talking support about grants and donation per se, but opportunities so that they can build their livelihoods. In TCS, when you talk about sustainable businesses, we have what we call the Digital Impact Square in Nashik. This has been running for about 8 years now, whereby we promote community to start their businesses, but solving social or environmental challenges dekat India. And this goes across, clean water, for example. We call assistive technologies. If you're visually impaired, hearing impaired, sebagainya, how do you make sure that community also are able to be plugged into the normal lives of pretty much everyone by using this technology, right? So Digital Impact Square was created to essentially solve social environmental problem, but using a business model. So we talk about agri-tech, assistive tech, renewable and stuff like that. And that is what we believe it should be mainstream in the future. And like I said, I mentioned a bit about Social Enterprise Education Lab with Petronas. So that is a version that we partner with our client partner Petronas, basically, to do that in Malaysia. And it's a bit more localized lah. We talk about aging populations. We're talking about food securities and stuff like that. all in all, we believe also to amplify these solutions is using digital and technology. So that has been our bread and butter when we do IT delivery technology services. But it's not just about improving business processes and digital sebagainya, but can we take a lens also to amplify sustainability and impact to the communities? And that's what Digital Impact Square in Ashik India is doing. That is what we continue to do with Petronas, with Social Enterprise Education Lab, and hopefully we can, create more impact to the livelihoods of the rakyat and the people here juga lah.
Correct, and the support, it's not only by giving, but also to create more opportunities.
Yes,
And
empowering communities.
empowering communities, correct. And we have 1 month left before going to, I think less than 1 month,
Yeah.
a few more weeks going
Yeah.
to 2025. New hope, new resolutions. And probably, Dazri, I want to ask you my last question. If you could make one sustainability wish for business
Yeah.
in the new year,
Yeah.
what would it be?
That's a good question. I remain wishful, but also I remain it will turn into practical execution, right? I think my ambition or vision for sustainability here, one is actually businesses, tak kisahlah whether you're big, small, corporate, multinational, GLCs, for example. My wish is actually that don't compromise social and environmental stewardship for the long term just because pursuing short-term profit. And we covered this a bit tadi, right? So do I go for revenues, profit earnings, and compromise the obligation lah, orang kata amanah, for example, for the environment, society, right? So I wish that balancing act, and I think a lot of companies now are doing, forecasting, budgeting, planning for 2025 and onwards. Consider this more, right? The long-term investment, when we talk about society and environment, is far more important, I feel. And we're talking about the future generations lah, of Malaysia. So that's something that I feel we can do more of. And I'm hopeful and wishful that we're going to that mindset.
And definitely we're hoping to bring all of this wish and hope to 2025 and a year ahead. And maybe we could recap on what you've just said around our topic here is do not sacrifice short-term profit do not sacrifice the environmental value or obligations or responsibility just for a short-term profit.
Gains, yeah.
So maybe that is the end of our discussion here. Again, I want to say thank you very much to Wan Dazrik from Tata Consultancy Services. And again, I want to say have a good holiday and I'll see you next year.
Thank you so much, Nina.
And definitely all of our discussion here will be featured in astrawani.com and across all social media platforms.
Bila kerja sendiri, semua kena buat sendiri. Tapi, bersama rakan niaga, semuanya dapat ditempuhi bersama.
Kementerian Dalam Negeri memberi lampu hijau supaya pengesanan dadah dilakukan terhadap pengguna web.
Tahap integriti warga polis Diraja Malaysia PDRM masih membimbangkan walaupun peringatan dan amaran diberikan berulang kali.
Anwar menegaskan bahawa negara ini tidak mengiktiraf Israel secara de jure meskipun keberadaan negara itu di peringkat antarabangsa. Malaysia tidak akan meminda peta sempadan maritim dan tetap mempertahankan kawasan dan kedaulatan negara di Laut Cina Selatan.
Daulat Tuanku.
Hasil karya anak tempatan yang berbeza.
Kita kancil yang boleh jadi malas zegak sepanjang zaman lah.
Ini adalah karya agung.
Kancil, kisah lama berwajah baru.
Baik, dalam segmen ini kita akan memberi tumpuan khas kepada generasi muda ataupun belia. Menurut laporan United Nations Youth Office, terdapat 1.9 bilion belia berusia 10 hingga 24 tahun dan kita menyaksikan jumlah ataupun generasi belia terbesar dalam sejarah yang juga memberi peluang untuk membuat perubahan yang lebih besar. Dan namun suara mereka sering terpinggir dengan kurang dari 3% penggubal dasar berusia bawah 30 tahun dan kurang daripada 1% penyertaan wanita dalam politik. Dan komuniti Global Shapers menegaskan penyertaan belia dalam pembuatan ataupun pembangunan keputusan dasar perlu diperluas bagi mencabar status quo dan mencari penyelesaian inovatif terhadap cabaran global. Dan tambah Shapers juga, belia harus menjadi pemangkin perubahan untuk masa depan yang lebih inklusif dan juga progresif. Dan dalam konteks ini, serta melihat kepada tinjauan 2025 di peringkat tempatan, kita akan kupas lebih mendalam untuk memahami bagaimanakah suara belia dapat mencorakkan masa depan pembangunan ekonomi Malaysia bergerak ke hadapan. Sudah tentu saya mempersilakan tetamu ataupun kita boleh cakap anak muda daripada Presiden Kelab Belia Prihatin Malaysia, Lokman Hakim. Saya nak ucapkan terima kasih, Lokman. Sudah tentu banyak harapan untuk anak-anak muda generasi belia pada tahun depan. What can we do better? Apa masalah yang perlu kita tangani segera? Tetapi melihat kepada tahun ini, kalau kita lihat sejak pentadbiran kerajaan ataupun ekonomi madani, banyak yang menekankan ayat reformasi. Dan reformasi ini memerlukan pelibatan oleh setiap pihak di setiap peringkat, tua mahupun muda. Dan dalam konteks ini kita nak lihat bagaimanakah peranan anak muda belia, kalau kita boleh cakap situasi pelibatan mereka dalam dasar-dasar ataupun dalam sektor utama setakat ini, yang mungkin boleh kongsikanlah setakat tahun 2024 pelibatan belia dalam pembangunan dasar, ekonomi dan sosial Malaysia.
Ya, pertamanya terima kasih Awani kerana menjemput saya sekali lagi pada pagi ini. Saya kira kalau kita nak singkap terus perbandingan antara 24 ke 5 ataupun juga 10 tahun lepas, peningkatan ke arah yang lebih baik itu ada. Mungkin daripada segi representasi belia di dalam arena pembuatan dasar dalam apa orang panggil Dewan Rakyat, Dewan Negara, itu ada. Cuma mungkin ada beberapa kekangan yang kita boleh bincang sekejap lagi. Sebagai contoh, untuk menjadi ahli Dewan Negara perlu sekurang-kurangnya berumur 30 tahun. Tetapi definisi belia pula adalah individu yang berumur daripada 18 tahun sehingga 30 tahun. So makna kata menjelang masa seseorang itu layak menjadi ahli Dewan Negara, so mereka bukan lagi belia. So tapi kalau kita lihat daripada segi angka Dewan Rakyat, itu pastinya ada peningkatan. Pertama. Kedua, institusi-institusi di bawah kementerian juga ada peningkatan. Seperti kami sini, Kelab Belia Prihatin Malaysia, kita adalah sebahagian daripada Majlis Penasihat kepada Menteri NRAS, Natural Resources and Environment Sustainability, yang mana dulu tak ada. Mungkin program atau inisiatif seperti Fellow Perdana, Fellow Korporat dan sebagainya ada dibuat di bawah Kementerian Belia dan Sukan. Tetapi mungkin pendekatan ataupun objektifnya berbeza. Yang mana program-program itu adalah kita boleh sebut sebagai job placement training. Nak dedahkan belia-belia ini kepada bagaimana untuk berada di dalam pejabat menteri, pejabat pentadbiran dan sebagainya. Tetapi yang ini lebih kepada menyuarakan pandangan dan bagaimana pandangan-pandangan itu boleh diterjemahkan menjadi dasar-dasar dan polisi. Termasuk yang baru sekali kita tahu baru-baru ini adalah Akta RUU Perubahan Iklim Negara yang baru dibentangkan oleh Yang Berhormat Menteri Nazmi. Ya.
Mungkin boleh kongsikan dalam banyak-banyak bidang sektor utama, belia banyak terlibat dekat mana? Teknologi ke, AI ke, keusahawanan ke, kelestarian seperti Lokman sendiri ke? Ke mana mereka terarah sebenarnya?
Pastinya kalau kita bincang berkenaan 2025 ini, kita bincang juga berkenaan dengan kecerdasan buatan dan sebagainya, belia adalah satu pengguna teknologi yang paling besar daripada segi jumlahnya, jumlah komposisi pengguna pertama. Kedua, belia juga kita perlu iktiraf bahawa golongan inilah yang mencipta inovasi-inovasi baru. Bila TikTok sebagai contoh mula ada dalam pasaran Malaysia, yang mungkin pada awalnya menggunakan adalah belia. Untuk tujuan apa itu kita boleh bincang kemudian. Ada yang menari, ada yang dance sebagainya. Tapi kemudian itu bagaimana inovasi-inovasi menggunakan aplikasi-aplikasi ini, yang pertama. Kedua, lebih daripada itu juga dimulakan oleh belia. Kalau kita lihat di bukan sahaja di dalam sektor pentadbiran, tapi juga di dalam sektor-sektor korporat. Kalau lihat siapa yang menggerakkan kempen-kempen pemasaran, kebanyakannya belia. Kerana belialah yang menjadi pengguna dan citra, the zeitgeist of this apa orang panggil movement, semangat zaman, zeitgeist, semangat zaman, itu dikawal ataupun dicipta oleh belia zaman sekarang. Tetapi bukanlah kita nak kata apa orang panggil penolakan ataupun kita nak menidakkan hikmah ataupun pengalaman orang yang lebih tua, tetapi itu adalah satu, kita kena acknowledge lah peranan belia yang bukan saja menjadi pengguna tetapi juga mencipta inovasi-inovasi baru.
Dan juga kerjasama multigenerasi ni amat penting kerana kita tahu kita harus menghargai wisdom, tahun-tahun wisdom oleh generasi-generasi lama. Namun mungkin generasi muda belia mungkin mereka mempunyai pendekatan yang agak baharu yang mungkin tidak biasa dengan generasi lama. Tetapi penting untuk kita gabungkanlah kedua-duanya, intelektual dan juga pendekatan yang lebih relevan. Bercakap mengenai belia, seperti yang kita tahu Luqman sendiri terlibat dalam kerjasama termasuk agensi kerajaan, penasihat dan juga ada event seperti YSF. Sebelum ini saya pernah temu bual untuk kita lihat apakah antara objektif-objektif acara tersebut dan bercakap mengenai sektor korporat melalui pengalaman kerjasama Luqman bersama agensi kerajaan, sektor korporat Malaysia ini. Adakah mereka mempunyai sifat terbuka yang besar dalam menerima input-input belia anak muda akan datang dalam, kita boleh cakap dalam konteks decision making?
Ya, itu yang kita perlu lihat balik. Bila kita bercakap berkenaan dengan kuasa membuat keputusan, itu mungkin kita di Malaysia ini belum capai lagi tahap itu. Kecuali kalau anda berani dan boleh masuk sertai pilihan raya. Itu cerita lain. Pertama. Kedua, kalau kita lihat institusi, saya ambil contoh sebagai perbincangan hari ini, adalah agensi di bawah Kementerian Belia dan Sukan sebagai contoh. Kalau kita lihat balik, kita semak, setiap tahun, baru-baru ini bulan 10 ada belanjawan. Dan setiap kali belanjawan itu ada penjawatan-penjawatan yang dikeluarkan. Jawatan A berapa gajinya, jawatan B berapa gajinya. Mungkin untuk 2025 dah selesai. 2026 belanjawan nanti, mungkin perkara-perkara ataupun jawatan-jawatan tertentu itu yang dekat dengan belia boleh diinstitusikan satu dan boleh digazetkan kepada belia. Kerana sekarang kalau kita lihat agensi belia kebanyakannya yang menjadi pemimpin ataupun yang mencorakkan agensi tersebut adalah bukan golongan belia. Jadi kena semak balik. Adakah citra ataupun zeitgeist belia zaman sekarang ini itu diambil kira? So itu perkara kedua. Ketiga, kalau kita bincang juga berkenaan dengan apa orang panggil kuasa pemutus, bukan sahaja kerajaan. Kita boleh lihat sebagai contoh dalam badan-badan korporat sudah ada jabatan ataupun bahagian yang kita panggil sebagai ESG department. Itu kalau kita bincang pasal kelestarian. Tapi bagaimana pula berkenaan dengan belia? Bukanlah semua badan-badan korporat itu perlu apa orang panggil buat satu jabatan khusus untuk belia. Sebab kalau you syarikat, sebagai contoh syarikat makanan, kenapa perlu ada belia? Mungkin perkara yang boleh digubal ataupun yang boleh dicadangkan, boleh difikirkan oleh kerajaan adalah mungkin untuk diwujudkan kuota. Sebelum ni kita pernah dengar 30% kepimpinan wanita. Bagaimana pula dengan belia? Satu, dalam bab kuota ini. Kedua, kuota itu bukan sahaja kuota untuk melengkapkan formula itu. Maksudnya untuk nampak cantik. Tetapi perlu diberi empowerment. Melalui apa? Melalui yang kita bincang tadi. Bagi gaji, bagi aset, bagi belia untuk run organisation. Tapi bagaimana pula kalau dua situasi ini tidak berlaku? Kita perlu cipta ruang sendiri. Kita perlu cipta peluang sendiri. Ini apa yang kita boleh lihat seperti syarikat contoh Grab. Kalau kita cerita kalau ni, banyaklah kalau dia kan. Tapi kalau Grab itu betul-betul dimanfaatkan, Grab pengasasnya adalah orang Malaysia. Kan? Yang pada masa itu ketika Grab itu dibuat adalah belia. Bagaimana inovasi-inovasi baru ini dapat kita ambil dan jangan kita sekali lagi terlepas peluang untuk ada this unicorn startup. Mungkin saya rasa sekarang ini ada beberapa yang sedang dibina dan sedang menuju ke jalan itu. Ya. Siapa yang perlu buat pertimbangan? Kerajaan lah. Bagaimana untuk accommodate, bagaimana untuk pastikan belia-belia ini diberi cukup ruang. Dan yang lebih penting, bukan saja ruang, bukan saja peluang, tetapi betul-betul memaknakan peluang dan ruang itu melalui kerangka mekanisme yang ada di dalam kerajaan. Ya.
Ruang dan peluang itu sudah tentu penting untuk kita manfaatkannya. Dan apabila cakap mengenai kerjasama bersama korporat, agensi kerajaan dan juga syarikat-syarikat di luar sana, kita tahu belia walaupun belia diberi peluang untuk lead the project, tapi kita harus tahu pimpinan adalah daripada generasi-generasi yang lebih tua. Mungkin kalau kita lihat daripada setiap pekerjaan kita, mungkin kita lihat bos kita, employee kita, mungkin daripada generation baby boomer, X, mindset yang berlainan, pendekatan yang berlainan. Lepas tu kalau kita lihat tenaga kerja atau employees di bawahnya adalah anak-anak muda. So bagaimana untuk kita pupuk kerjasama antara dua generasi ini penting kerana kita tahu mereka ni dua-dua kita tidak boleh cakap okey belia yang akan take the lead and lead the conversation pada masa akan datang, tetapi kita tidak boleh mereka sahaja bergerak keseorangan. Kita tahu harus daripada pimpinan yang lebih dewasa, lebih tua untuk pimpin kita. Dan kita tahu kita harus gabung dan kaitkan antara kedua-dua generasi punya mindset, termasuk juga dengan pendekatan, approach. Jadi bagaimana untuk kita tambah baik atau pupuk kerjasama antara pelbagai generasi?
Ya, pertama saya rasa perlu ada generation transition. Sama ada daripada segi mindset, cara gaya fikir, juga dalam perkara-perkara yang termasuk dalam gaya kerja. Kerana saya rasa ini adalah budaya yang mencerminkan macam kita sebut tadi lah guys, semangat zaman. Mungkin zaman sekarang belia ataupun individu yang lahir 2000 ke atas, tahun 2000 ke atas, itu mereka lahir memang telefon sudah di tepi. Gen Z.
Tapi mereka adalah produk daripada generasi sebelumnya.
Betul.
Penggunaan.
Tapi mungkin cara kita melihat sesuatu itu berbeza. Contoh kalau kita boleh lihat di video-video kan, buat simbol call. Mungkin kalau untuk generasi yang lebih tua, mereka buat begini. Tapi kalau untuk generasi yang lebih muda, dia buat dial di telefon, So cara kita menyingkap suatu perkara itu berbeza. Jadi apa jalan tengahnya? Kita untuk maju ke depan tak bolehlah bergaduh. Oh ini cara orang tua, ini cara orang baru. Orang baru belum tentu lagi tahu keberkesanan itu boleh ke tidak. Sebab itu ada pepatah Arab yang kata kebijakan kekuatan orang muda digabung dengan hikmah orang tua, itu kalau digabung jadi hebat. Kita perlukan dua-dua. Tapi bagaimana? Perlu dibuat satu formula yang boleh orang kata bukan saja mencerminkan sesuatu budaya kerja satu entiti itu, tapi juga yang lebih penting adalah kena dengan visi dan misi matlamat badan tersebut, ataupun sebab penting untuk kita pastikan bahawa di samping untuk kita melakukan pemberdayaan golongan muda ini, syarikat juga tidak rugi. Sebab kalau syarikat rugi, tahun depan apa dia buat? Dia akan lay off lebih ramai orang, yang menyebabkan belia ini pun tak ada ruang dan peluang untuk terus berkhidmat di syarikat tersebut. So, perlu ada balance up. Belia pula, saya rasa perlu ada pertukaran mindset juga. Kita bukan lagi pemimpin pelapis masa hadapan, tetapi kita perlu memimpin mula daripada sekarang. Ada ramai kawan-kawan saya, akhir 20-an, sudah jadi vice president, sudah jadi sudah memegang jawatan-jawatan senior di syarikat-syarikat besar, di badan-badan institusi keuangan, bank yang berpusat di Kuala Lumpur. Maksudnya dia bukan branch. Dia bukan apa orang panggil ketua branch bank sekian-sekian, tapi yang berada di HQ. Dah pegang posisi itu. Maksudnya transition itu dan kemahuan syarikat-syarikat besar ini sudah ada. Keinginan itu sudah ada. Kalau kita sebut dalam kerajaan pula political will. So political will ini di dalam corporate sudah ada. Untuk orang yang lebih tua berikan tanggungjawab dan peranan yang lebih besar kepada orang muda. Jadi saya rasa tak ada masalah. Mungkin untuk korporat bertukar itu. Cuma yang kita bimbang ataupun mungkin yang sedikit susah sebenarnya adalah orang politik. Sebab mereka mungkin ada perancangan
Agenda mereka tersendiri.
Exactly.
Betul.
You know, kalau sebelum jadi Perdana Menteri, semua nak masa jadi Perdana Menteri. So dia tak akan letak jawatan. So bila dah 50 tahun punya masih nak jadi ahli parlimen, so mungkin itu susah. Ruang untuk orang baru tak ada. So itu mencerminkan, diterjemahkan kepada apa yang kita lihat dalam akta-akta kita, perundangan kita, gaya kita, apa orang panggil, respon kepada isu-isu semasa. Kan? Kalau kita lihat contoh baru-baru ini banjir. Di Kelantan, di Pantai Timur lah, Kelantan, Terengganu dan sebagainya. Bagaimana banjir yang sebenarnya tiap-tiap tahun berlaku ini, kita masih tidak boleh menyelesaikan masalah itu secara tuntas. Okeylah, kita lihat perbahasan, saya lihat di DUN Selangor, saya lihat di Parlimen, isunya adalah penyelesaian itu tidak boleh dibuat dalam masa yang singkat. Satu, mungkin bajetnya besar. Kedua, infra yang mahu dibina itu besar. Tetapi kenapa selepas saya sekarang sudah hampir 30 tahun. Tahun ni saya 29 tahun, beberapa hari lagi saya akan 30 tahun. Dalam tempoh itu, tidak ada tahun sejak saya conscious, tak ada tahun yang tak banjir. Tapi kenapa setiap kali banjir datang, penyelesaian yang diambil sama ada oleh kerajaan, itu bersikap reaktif. Reaktif adalah benda dah jadi, baru kita bertindak. Kenapa tidak proaktif?
Sebelum itu lagi bertindak.
Exactly. So mungkin diadakan seminar-seminar ataupun latihan menghadapi banjir, ataupun mungkin daripada sudut undang-undang itu pun sudah ditambah baik.
Betul.
Daripada sungai mungkin saya tak tahu sebab bukan kepakaran saya. Mungkin 5 km sudah tidak boleh buat rumah sebagainya. Tapi bagaimana pula untuk pindahkan rumah sedia ada yang mungkin sudah 100-200 tahun memang di tepi sungai. Jadi perlu ada pendekatan baru.
Betul. Kita tidak boleh melibatkan anak muda hanya selepas berlaku bencana seperti banjir. Okey, kita perlukan tenaga anak-anak muda ni untuk akar barang, untuk pemindahan rumah. Bukan sebagai sukarelawan saja, tapi libatkan mereka dalam perancangan sebelum itu. Bagaimana untuk elak banjir. Kerana kita tahu idea dan input kadang-kadang memerlukan penyelesaian yang lebih inovatif dan lebih relevan. Dan setakat ini mungkin boleh kongsikan apakah antara inisiatif yang telah dilaksanakan oleh Malaysia ataupun sedang dalam perancangan Malaysia untuk mengintegrasikan perspektif belia dalam pembangunan dasar negara sehingga kini dan apa yang diperlukan lagi memasuki tahun 2025.
Ya, bercakap dalam konteks ataupun kerangka Kelab Belia Perhatian Malaysia, apa yang kita buat setiap tahun macam yang Nina pun sebut tadi, kita jalankan satu forum yang kita namakan sebagai Youth Sustainability Forum. So itu sebenarnya adalah satu platform untuk kita dengar pengalaman mereka yang lebih tua. Sebab kadang-kadang anak-anak muda belia ini ada cita-cita, ada semangat untuk mereka buat perubahan, buat yang tinggi-tinggi, kadang-kadang tak tercapai di akal. Tapi bagaimana untuk ada orang yang perlu tarik balik, membumikan balik idea-idea itu. Jadi itu kita perlukan pengalaman dan kebijakan orang tua. Sama juga di dalam kerajaan. Saya rasa inisiatif-inisiatif yang sama juga berlaku dengan pesat dan dengan pantas. Persoalannya yang perlu dijawab secara tuntas dan secara jujur oleh mereka-mereka yang berada di posisi-posisi yang berkaitan adalah bagaimana perbincangan-perbincangan itu diterjemahkan. Aspirasi belia yang sudah dibumikan oleh golongan-golongan dewasa itu dibumikan dan ditranslatekan menjadi dasar-dasar di lapangan. Sebagai contoh, saya nak orang panggil bawa satu inisiatif. Contoh di orang panggil Dhaka, Bangladesh. Mereka buat Football for Change. So di sana Dhaka ni ada masalah orang panggil dadah yang teruk. Jadi apa dia buat adalah dia libatkan anak-anak muda yang dengan dadah dan sebagainya ini dengan bola. So kenapa? Bola tu bukanlah satu instrumen yang itu sahaja yang boleh digunakan.
Tapi mereka nak start with something simple untuk perubahan.
Exactly. Satu. Kedua, you nak buang, bukan you nak buang masa dia orang, you nak occupied. Nak isi masa dia dengan benda yang berfaedah.
Betul.
Di Kelab Belia Perhatian, kita pun buat benda yang sama. Kita bukan saja tanam pokok di Selangor, di Kuala Lumpur, tapi kita pergi ke Sabah, ke Sarawak, ke tempat-tempat yang mungkin sebagai contoh perbincangan lestari ini tidak dibuat dengan begitu pesat dan begitu rancak. So kita bawa. Kenapa? Kerana kita tahu belia-belia ini kalau tidak diisi dengan perkara-perkara yang betul, dia akan cari masalah untuk mungkin main game dan sebagainya. Bukan nak kata main game salah, tapi mungkin ada perkara yang lebih bermanfaat untuk mereka buat. Dan ini, perkara-perkara begini hanya boleh dibuat dengan lebih besar dan lebih berkesan program-program itu apabila orang yang membuat dasar, orang yang bertanggungjawab, dengan instrumen kerajaan yang ada, lakukan dengan mungkin lebih besar. Bukan saja sekadar untuk meraih bak kata PMX semalam political stunt, pergi tangkap gambar sebagainya. Semalam PMX marah kan.
Dan kita lihat negara juga berusaha untuk mencapai negara berpendapatan tinggi dan kita memerlukan peranan anak muda untuk mainkan peranan lebih aktif untuk memacu pertumbuhan ini. Dan mungkin akhir sekali mungkin boleh kongsikanlah apakah antara cita-cita hasrat oleh anak muda, apakah antara matlamat yang perlu diketengahkan, apakah bagaimana untuk kita tingkatkan lagi suara untuk pastikan harapan, impian, nasihat kita ni betul-betul didengari.
Ya. Pertama, kepada belia-belia, perkara itu perlu datang dan perlu ada daripada kita sendiri. Kita perlu nampak apa yang kita nak, bukan saja tunggu orang suap. Sama ada tak kisahlah bos kita, kerajaan dan sebagainya. Kita sendiri perlu nampak visi ke mana hala tuju kita lagi 5 tahun, lagi 10 tahun. Pertama. Kedua adalah pesanan saya untuk belia bagi tahun 2025 ini. Bermimpilah setinggi bulan. Kalau jatuh nanti di awan-awanan juga.
Wow.
Okey. Kenapa? Kita kena ada impian lah. Tak kisah kalau belia sekarang ada cita-cita nak jadi CEO, ada cita-cita nak jadi chairman bank
nak
ke
jadi
apa.
mungkin
apa
bahagian
sahaja.
sisut.
Apa sahaja. Perdana Menteri pun tak ada masalah nak jadi menteri ke, nak jadi menteri besar
Cita-cita
ke.
tak apa.
Cita-cita tak
impian
apa.
dia tinggi.
Ya. Tapi kalau tak ada, itu yang susah. Sebab kalau nak jadi businessman, dan langkah seterusnya apa? Langkah seterusnya adalah kita belajarlah bagaimana untuk menjadi niagawan yang ataupun orang panggil usahawan yang berjaya. Ada jalannya. Kalau nak jadi apa orang panggil ahli politik yang berjaya, yang cemerlang, ada jalannya. Mungkinlah duduk dengan parti yang menang sekarang, mungkinlah bajetnya lebih besar sebagainya. Contoh, kalau nak jadi academician, nak jadi ilmuwan, kena berguru dengan yang pakar. So, paling penting, yang utama sekali 2025, kalau saya 2025 nanti saya dah 30 tahun. So lagi 10 tahun saya dah 40 tahun. So apa cita-citanya? Bukanlah hasrat saya untuk kongsikan secara apa.
Nampak macam jauh lagi tapi sebenarnya singkat 10 tahun tu.
Ya, exactly. So 40 tahun. Apa yang kita nak buat? Kalau tanya saya, sudah ada cita-cita? Ada. Tapi persoalan dapat dicapai, dapat direalisasikan ataupun tidak, itu cerita lain lah. So dalam masa 10 tahun itu kita perlu bekerja keras untuk pastikan cita-cita, hasrat dan impian kita itu dapat dicapai. Tapi yang pasti, tak apa, cari impian, cari cita-cita anda. Boleh ke boleh? Boleh.
Boleh. Tapi Lokman, mungkin saya nak tambah lagi satu sedikit saja. Mungkin apa yang boleh kita pelajari daripada peringkat global dan adaptasi dalam konteks tempatan sendiri dalam kita boleh cakap situasi untuk memperkasa lagi golongan belia, terutama dalam decision making punya situation.
Ya, pertama saya kira kalau betul-betul ada political will di peringkat kerajaan, perlu diinstitusikan macam yang kita sebut tadi. Satu, melalui apa? Melalui belanjawan. So untuk 2025 dah tak boleh nak buat apa. Tetapi kalau kerajaan di bawah pimpinan Yang Amat Berhormat Datuk Seri Anwar Ibrahim betul-betul mau beri peluang kepada belia, institusikan melalui belanjawan, penjawatan, perlu ada. Jangan beri ialah sebab walaupun ruang bercakap tu dah ada, sebab mungkin pada mereka yang berpandangan negatif, ini adalah salah satu cara kerajaan untuk membendung. So, untuk tak nak bagi belia-belia ni buat demonstrasi, apa you buat? You kumpulkan mereka dalam satu bilik. Tak apalah, spend, luangkan 1-2 jam masa, dia boleh cakap terus, dia ada FaceTime dengan menteri, dengan Perdana Menteri.
Open communication.
Open communication. Kita tak buat tak apa, tapi kita being seen, mendengar. Sebab kalau tidak nanti dia orang pergi demo. Bila dia buat demonstrasi depan parlimen, depan Dataran Merdeka sebagainya, lagi parah. Nanti akan ada Al Jazeera dan sebagainya. Bring back attention to Malaysia. So kita tak nak. Tak apa. Kita 1 jam, 2 jam, kita dengar apa belia-belia ni. Kita tak nak itu. Kita nak belia memang betul-betul boleh buat sesuatu yang baru. Boleh ubah. ubah ini bukanlah semua benda kita nak ubah. Ada banyak perkara-perkara yang sudah baik. Bukanlah mana kata kalau orang panggil, saya bagi contoh Tengku Taufik yang mengemudi Petronas sekarang ini. Pada masa beliau dapat pimpin Petronas itu, saya rasa relatifnya cukup mudah lah berbanding dengan chairman-chairman yang sebelum itu. Tetapi bila tanggungjawab itu diberi, kita dapat tunjukkan bahawa beliau ini pun boleh buktikan yang we can deliver. Jadi bagaimana? Melalui belanjawan, melalui gazet kerajaan yang perlu dibuat. Tukarlah kerajaan 6 bulan sekali ke, 2 tahun sekali ke, 5 tahun sekali ke, perkara itu sudah dibuat, sudah ada. Kita mulakan dengan agensi-agensi di bawah Kementerian Belia dan Sukan. Kementerian Belia dan Sukan, pastinya ada agensi belia yang berkaitan belia, pastinya ada agensi yang berkaitan dengan sukan. Semak balik, adakah institusi-institusi yang berkaitan dengan belia ini dipimpin oleh belia? Adakah kita
Adakah
ada
mereka
talent?
menerap bakat
Ya.
dan menerap perspektif belia?
Betul.
Banyak
And then
aspek.
Ada isu ataupun ada masalah. Orang kata ada ke belia yang ada talent untuk memimpin gerakan-gerakan ataupun institusi ini, establishment? Ada. Kita boleh lihat banyak. Dan kebanyakan mereka yang mungkin bila balik ke Malaysia ataupun yang sudah berada di Malaysia, kita rasa tidak cukup peluang, tidak cukup ruang, apa kita buat? Kita pindah, kita hijrah ke luar negara. So ini yang kita tak nak. Rosak negara ini.
Yalah,
Sebab
kita
kata
panggil
Cam
brain
X.
drain kan.
Exactly.
Kita kemakin kekurang bakat untuk memacu pertumbuhan Malaysia dalam pelbagai aspek ini agak susah sebenarnya. Namun itu adalah harapan, aspirasi anak muda sendiri, terutama kita Lokman Hakim merupakan Presiden Kelab Belia Perhati Malaysia, kerana bantu kami faham juga bagaimana untuk menerapkan peranan yang lebih aktif dalam kalangan belia untuk mencorak masa depan yang lebih adil untuk ekonomi dan juga dasar pembangunan negara. Sekali lagi saya nak ucapkan terima kasih sudah tentu, dan saya harap kita akan jumpa lagi selepas ini. Dan sudah tentu setiap perbincangan ini akan kami rangkumkan di astroawani.com dan di semua platform digital Astro Awani.
Apa signifikan dengan pengumuman ataupun berita yang keluar dari media China ini berkaitan dengan hasrat Malaysia untuk menyertai gabungan BRICS?
Kita mau dapat lebih banyak umpamanya pelaburan daripada negara China.
Kalau melihat kepada Akta Kanak-Kanak 2001, adakah kita terlalu lambat untuk melihat proses untuk meminda Akta Sedia Ada?
Kita perlu ada penyelarasan. Kita tak mau bekerja secara silo.
Daulat Tuanku.
Sebelum memulakan perjalanan, pastikan dokumen perjalanan anda lengkap. Kekalkan jarak sekurang-kurangnya 10 meter dari kenderaan depan. Jika anda ingin memotong kenderaan besar, berwaspada dengan titik buta.
Southeast Asia startup ecosystem is booming, but a shift is underway. While traditional models prioritize a rapid scaling and revenue growth, a new wave of entrepreneurs are focused on building ethical and sustainable business that align with community values, especially halal principles. As the market matures, the challenge is clear. How can startups remain profitable while staying true to their ethical values and contributing positively to their communities? And today we explore how startups can balance revenue pressures with ethical integrity, the role of accelerator programs like Hassan VC in guiding these ventures, and how understanding local dynamics can help businesses grow sustainable. And for that, I welcome you, our guest, Umar Munshi, the managing partner, Hassan VC. I want to say thank you very much, Umar, for joining me. Firstly, you want to take a look the main challenge, especially for the startups. What are some of the issues, challenges that they have encountered when trying to achieve profitability while staying true to their ethics and halal principles?
Right. Thank you. Thank you for having me here. And maybe I'll start off by sharing that in our perspective, in our understanding, upholding and fulfilling halal principles is not necessarily something that affects success and profitability, right? Although there would be a case, or sometimes there would be cases where certain products or certain markets or certain services that may not comply or may not be aligned with halal principles. For those, the startups and companies may have to not be involved or not serve that particular market. But in general, we see that halal principles generally ethical principles that can be universally applied. And when businesses subscribe to such ethics, this actually creates more value and more sustainability, and potentially it can also help in the growth aspect of the startup.
Umar, maybe you can share with us, are there any successful example that startup entrepreneurs have successfully balanced it, and what are the key decisions or the key approaches that enable them to succeed?
Yeah, that's a very good question. There are actually many companies. The thing about halal is you can brand yourself as halal, or you can be silent about it and just ensure that you subscribe to halal principles, which, as I mentioned earlier, in most cases would be considered universal. Now, what we see and in our experience and what we share to the startups that we invest in is that look at the substance, the value of what you're offering and communicate it effectively, right? Whether it's the ethical halal component or it is more on the business value, that communication is key, right? Not just asserting halal, but why halal or what about halal. Yeah, so in that case, it could be something that creates benefit to society, something that prevents harm, something that brings, more, for example, halal, something that's halal can also be more inclusive because you can have those of the Muslim faith as well as those of other faiths involved.
Mm-hmm. And Umar, what are the common pitfalls that halal businesses face when scaling especially, and how can they avoid compromising their values in the pursuit of growth amid in uncertainties?
Yeah, I think a major challenge which we are trying to solve is that Malaysia, although Islamic finance is very developed, it's number one Islamic finance, Islamic economy or halal hub in the world, but there's almost no or very little halal VC. So when halal companies want to scale, they necessarily need halal funding as well, right? That's where we see that there is a challenge or there is a gap in the market. There is this lack of halal VC, halal investors for a long time. However, at the same time, the silver lining is that we can see today that even major global VC brands and franchises are starting to invest in halal startups. So while it is still a challenge, steps are being taken towards solving it.
And talking about VC, Umar, we know that the recent news about tightening the VC funding environment, what are the challenges that you have observed in the industries which are impacting most of the fundraising?
Maybe I can identify two factors or two challenges. One is a general lack of exposure and understanding of VC by stakeholders. When I say stakeholders, I include the public as well. Right? As we are aware, there's some high-profile negative cases recently and in the past. And the thing about VC is that it's a very unique, I would say maybe counterintuitive kind of investment where you expect most of your investments to actually fail and only a small portion of it to actually give you your returns. So that is something that not many are familiar with or comfortable with, but that is something that is inherent within the whole concept and approach of startups and VC investment, right? So that understanding needs to be enhanced so that there can be more harmony and more synergy in the ecosystem. Yeah, and the other aspect I believe is the mindset of mindset towards failure and risk taking, because that is the name of the game in venture capital. While there is definitely a duty of care and responsibility towards investors when founders receive investment, but at the same time, investors need to go in with their eyes open, and the stakeholders need to understand that the reality is that the chances of success is not usually very high, and that small portion of the companies that we invest in that do make it big, that's where the VC value is really unlocked.
And also factoring that VC is becoming more competitive, do you think it's going to be very hard, or it's going to become harder for ethical business to secure investment? And how do they overcome all of these barriers?
Yeah. On the contrary, I think and I believe that the opportunity today for startup entrepreneurship, technology entrepreneurship, it's actually much more open and much more accessible to entrepreneurs because of the way that things have become democratized in terms of technology. A non-tech background person can start a tech business, right? And a techie person can learn to do business. And today we have, of course, tools like AI and so on that make it much cheaper and much easier to start a business. So I think the barriers to starting a business has gone down very significantly, and that makes it more capital efficient. You don't need so much money, and so VCs or whatever capital stock is available can be spread out to a lot more companies. So I think and I believe and I hope that it's actually going to be easier moving forward to raise funds, but the funds will be smaller because you don't need so much money to run a business.
And that is a situation from entrepreneurs and venture capitals. And in Malaysia, probably we can relate it into the global context. What are some of the trends you anticipate will shape the future of venture capital in Malaysia in the coming years?
Right. Two very clear trends that we can see. There are many, but maybe I'll highlight these two. One is the trend towards having businesses that are more people-focused, human-focused, society or community-focused. Meaning it's to benefit a larger group of people, right? You can call it impact investment, socially responsible investment, and so on. And this is where the halal aspect also comes into play, because the halal paradigm and framework is something that is very well developed and well set, and Muslims, non-Muslims alike can subscribe to that. The other that I see is related to my earlier point, where you can start and grow a business with very few people and very few resources. So this kind of, maybe you can call it micro entrepreneurship, although we're not talking about microfinance, we're talking about startups. You can have very small, very lean startups that can do big things and reach a certain scale before it needs to raise significant funds.
That is also the trends in the coming years for Malaysia to take a look on. And if I'm going to bring to a larger context, especially within the international, we can see, given the global economics uncertainty, do you see any shift in the investor preference? Are they more keen on ethical or sustainable business model?
Yes, definitely. I mean, as the world changes and continues to change, and the speed of change is only accelerating, right? Consumer preferences change, business preferences change, and the lens of doing things or subscribing to businesses or products, which has ethics and morals that are aligned to our own values, that has become so prominent and so important today with the BDS movement and so on. So, necessarily, startups need to move in that direction, and investors will also match that trend. We've really seen that happening around the world. And Malaysia, I feel, is a very suitable hub, a very suitable place for such ethical startups to be born.
Given about the venture capital trends in Malaysia and the global trends, and also I want to take a look on the governments, a role of the governments. How can the policy we play part in shaping the trends, and how should the startups prepare for any of regulatory changes?
All right. It's always a little bit challenging, I guess, for the government to really get involved in startups. But it definitely needs to happen, right? And in Malaysia, there's so much support from the government. It's really quite amazing. Because for us, we work with startups in many different countries in the region, and Malaysia is definitely up there in terms of support in general. I think what can be enhanced or improved is more engagement at the grassroots levels, and also a mindset that you want new people, you want new challenges, right? You want a new type of people involved, or new type of institutions involved, right? So the so-called traditional or typical channels in which government fund, government support trickles down and reaches the masses, I think there needs to be a little bit more flexibility and openness to have different people and different entities involved. Because as I mentioned earlier on, the mindset in VC is very different, and the value they can unlock in VC with that different mindset is very, very significant.
And Umar, I also want to hear a little bit about your advice on what will you give to startups, founders and even entrepreneurs in fundraising while upholding their ethical values, especially because we want to get it right. How can founders, entrepreneurs ensure they attract the right kind of investment, especially that aligns with their ethical values, and particularly in industries that might not prioritize or consider all of this aspect?
Yeah. This is, it can be very tricky because myself, I'm a founder, an entrepreneur for more than 20 years before I became an investor, a VC. Yeah, so I've been in that, I've been wearing that hat for most of my career, most of my business life. And it is very, very tricky sometimes, right? Definitely you should, as a founder, make it clear what your principles are, what your preferences are, what's your stand, what's your culture. In your deck, in your presentation, in the material that you share with your investor, right? So that the investor can benchmark and understand that you are this kind of company, or this is your preference and your approach, and that should be able to help you attract the right kind of investors, more than those that you may not want. But at the same time, it's always tricky to know, upfront, to try and figure out whether the investor is right for you. And in a startup environment, sometimes, especially today, the startups are chasing the investors, right? So my suggestion would be take it, fundamentally in a way that you understand what you're getting into. Don't just get excited when you have an offer for money, or and a VC is interested in you, but try to look at that VC's background, who they've invested in, who are the people behind the VC or the investor, before you take the step and receive their money.
In a very highly competitive fundraising environment, what strategies, what kind of innovative approach can be used by the founders, entrepreneurs to build a very strong ethical value that resonates with the investors?
Right. So, indeed, as you pointed out, it is currently very, very competitive when it comes to raising funds, right? Or in other words, it's quite challenging, it's quite difficult. A few things that founders can do. One is to really focus and zoom in on the key value proposition that you provide in the specific context of solving your problem, solving the problem for your customer. That's very, very critical. A lot of times, startups are trying to solve a problem that may not really exist, or that people are not willing to pay to get solved. So there's a very basic fundamental thing that in general, all startup founders would do well to remind yourselves, and I also remind myself about that a lot. The second thing is capital efficiency and sustainability. What I mean by that is show that you can create value, and if possible, even generate revenue, and best, if you can even do your business in a way that you can generate more revenue than your costs, meaning your cash flow positive. If you can do that at an early stage or at a young stage, then that will actually set you apart, right? There is a trade-off sometimes between being trying to grow as fast as you can, and looking after your bottom line. Right? But if you can strike that balance, and if you can show investors that I have reached this point, I don't need money to survive, but I would like your investment so I can go to another level, then that is something that investors would be interested in, because it shows that you can reach some point of stability even without additional external capital, and that will put you in a different category, right? So it's not easy, but it's something that we have seen happen a lot. In fact, this year we invested in 10 companies, half of them, almost half from Malaysia, and the rest from Indonesia and other countries. And most of them at pre-seed, which is early stage, almost sustainable, and some are already cash flow positive. So I was very surprised and happily surprised to see this, and that's also why we chose to invest in them.
And definitely, you've said that it's not easy, but it's possible. And we know that from easy to possible, that also made it happen is also from the support of accelerator programs like Hassan VC. And how can we understand that accelerator programs like Hassan VC assist startups in navigating local market conditions while ensuring they maintain their ethical practices?
Right. I mean, every accelerator has its own strength, and there are many accelerator programs out there. So you need to see, what's the potential value you can gain when you apply for an accelerator. And for Hassan, maybe I can highlight two things. One, the unique content and the trainers and speakers that we bring to our accelerator program from Malaysia and from outside Malaysia. The focus is, of course, on business principles, fundamentals, scaling up, and so on. But very much so, we also embed the Islamic worldview, in this case, of doing good, of barakah, or having blessings in what you do. Because when we do something that brings benefit to others, it circulates benefit in that sense, right? So that's a very unique and important part of our content. The second one that I want to highlight is the community. Right? So by virtue of our positioning and our content and our concept, which is Hassan means good. The word Hassan means good. So we're here to do good. We're here to help startups do good commercially and also from an ethical point of view. So that attracts founders and community members that think in a similar way. So when you join our accelerator, or when you are accepted into our accelerator, then you are part of this wider community, and that peer support and that those relationships and bonds that we develop over time is something that creates tremendous value for a lot of our founders.
As the managing director as one of the accelerator programs, maybe you can share the experience of the journey. What are some of the common ethical dilemmas that most of the entrepreneur startups face in the local markets, and how Hassan VC has tailored its support? Probably we can see tailor the support to startups so they can maintain ethical standards without sacrificing their market competitiveness.
Yes. So again, I don't think there is a trade-off per se between being ethical, being halal, and commercial strength or viability. In fact, we believe that it comes together. Nonetheless, there are definitely challenges in trying to be ethical, right? Sometimes there are opportunities for sort of easy money or quick wins that may not be too ethical, right? So then, for those kind of opportunities, ethical startups will have to miss them and let go of them. But I would say that although they may be seen to be opportunities in the short term, but in the long term, most likely it's not going to bring benefit to the startup itself, right? So while there's a little bit of this kind of loss, but I think the loss is outweighed by the long-term benefit of being true and ethical. Now, so with that said, startups really need to dig deep, and founders need to always have front and center the reason for their existence and the reason for them doing this. And we see that most founders that come to us, they have a much deeper reason for what they're doing and why they're doing it. It's not just to make money, but it's also to leave, in many cases, to leave a legacy. And there's a mindset that we try to share also with our founders. You are here to build your business for future generations, right? Whether your business lasts a very long time or not is out of our control. You can only try your best. But with that mindset of building a generational business, then naturally you will have principles intact.
And we know it's not only the founders, the entrepreneurs, and even the startups are facing challenges or regulatory changes. And we know that accelerator programs like Hassan VC also face unique regulatory challenges. Probably you can share with us, how do you address these regulatory changes that faced by halal business, especially in different countries of Southeast Asia?
Yeah, I think maybe in Islamic finance specifically, right? When you have startups that are in fintech, there would be some potential difficulty in going into different markets that may have differentiated Sharia principles or frameworks. But the fundamentals remain the same. So if you're not going to very, technical and tricky areas, then generally what we see is that a startup can quite easily expand to other countries or serve other countries based on the basic halal framework. Usually there's no issue there, right? Unless, for example, Islamic banks, where different countries have very, very strict and very, very specific ways of doing things, then it could be more challenging. But for startups, so far what we see is there is no big issue, there's no big challenge. And outside of finance, especially, something that's halal is generally accepted as halal in most parts of the world.
Are there any, we can say, accelerator programs should integrate into their offerings, such as mentorships or even partnership with the key halal certifications bodies?
Yeah, I think that's something that we've always tried to do and is very important. The halal ecosystem, especially regulators and bodies, I see, especially in the last few years, right, we see that they have become much more open and much more welcoming to innovations, to dealing with new parties, new ideas, new technology. Pre-pandemic, maybe 4 or 5 years ago, it was very, very tough. The gap in the way things were viewed is very, very significant. But that has gone away. It's largely gone away. And I commend, for example, the different religious authorities in the states in Malaysia, because we see that they are very actively welcoming such change. And startups and founders are also actively reaching out to sharing and educating the stakeholders so that there's more alignment and there's more comfort, right? This year, and especially, I can't mention too much in terms of projects that we are aware of, but next year there are going to be a lot of, I would say, breakthrough projects where the religious authorities as well as startups are working together hand in hand.
With the growing emphasis on ethical consumerism, maybe you can share with us, where do you see the halal startup ecosystem in Southeast Asia over the next 5 to 10 years, Umar?
All right. Very important question, because it's not just about consuming ethically, but it's about producing ethically as well, right? Because we are here working on the startups, the producers, the businesses that are creating products and providing services. So we know today that there is a need for a much more ethical way of doing business and products and services that come out of these businesses. Southeast Asia, with Malaysia as the hub for the Islamic economy, we see that it's a very suitable source or region for production. When I say production here, it's not manufacturing, it's startups, right? So producing technology solutions from here is something that has regional and global potential because we have many advantages, right? We have robust ecosystem, we have talent, our cost structure is significantly lower than, for example, the GCC, the Middle East, and in the West. So we can produce good products here. We have a good market. We can test, iterate, and enhance and improve our product or offering. And then from there, it can go overseas. And we have seen, a lot of such connections and bridges starting to be built. Like, it's still early days, but we can see that happening. Specifically, we see it between Malaysia and Saudi, for example, also with Qatar, right? So there is this kind of bridges being built and this kind of cross-border business happening, especially in the startup world.
And how can halal startup position themselves to not only meet the demand of the current, we can say current situation, but also anticipate in the future shift in the ethical consumer trends?
All right. So this part is very important, right? Because for startups, the approach that we propagate is you need to be very, very sensitive to the needs of your customers and your market, and to be able to quickly adjust to serve the market, right? So ethical consumerism has been here for a very long time, but in the past 1 year especially, it has been booming due to, let's just say, geopolitics. And this may accelerate because things are not getting better. So, for a startup, it's really about pushing it out there. For example, there is a fintech app in the UK, right? Not here, that allows investors to actually see what percentage of their investments go into certain types of companies that they may not want their money to go to. Right? So this with APIs, with open banking, with the general opening up of the market, a lot of data can be extracted from there. So my point here is that startups need to be very, very sensitive and need to listen to the customers and listen to the market so that we can continue to serve the market. And especially in this case, when it comes to ethics, we can make sure that we're on point in that regard.
And Umar, maybe lastly, I want to add one more question. With the rise of digital platforms, how might e-commerce and online strategy marketing, so we can say, evolve to meet the needs of ethical consumers in the Southeast Asia market?
All right. Personally, our view is that the approach to marketing today is generally not too sustainable. Here specifically, I'm referring to spending on ads, on big media, big social media platforms, search engines, and so on. A lot of money goes there. Whereas when it comes to, for example, in this case, ethical consumerism, it is a very community-based thing, right? So my view and what we propagate is that it should be focused on networks, communities, collaborations, and partnerships. Instead, over just throwing money at ads to get traction, right? So this is a much more targeted, sustainable way, because it can potentially create what is called a network effect, where word of mouth builds up and snowballs, and more people come together because they feel connected to what you are doing and they want to be part of it. Right? So this is what we see as the opportunity for startups today, instead of just doing the traditional or typical kind of ads expenditure.
All right, again, I will say thank you very much to our guest, Umar Munshi, the managing partner, Hassan VC, for helping us understand from the perspective of accelerator programs on how they boost the startup entrepreneurs, especially, and how can they balance between revenue pressures with ethical integrity in the future. And definitely that is the main aspect that we are focusing on. And again, I will say thank you very much, Umar, and I hope to see you again. And definitely all of our discussion here will be featured in astrawani.com and across all social media platforms.
Penstreaman ataupun muat turun kandungan haram seperti penggunaan kotak TV Android adalah aktiviti yang sangat berisiko dan boleh mendedahkan anda kepada malware, virus, ransom dan juga penipuan seperti scam dan juga judi atas talian. Elakkan daripada stream atau download haram. Ingat, layan ori, jangan curi.
Kementerian Dalam Negeri memberi lampu hijau supaya pengesanan dadah dilakukan terhadap pengguna web.
Tahap integriti warga polis di Raja Malaysia PDRM masih membimbangkan walaupun peringatan dan amaran diberikan berulang kali.
Anwar menegaskan bahawa negara ini tidak mengiktiraf Israel secara de jure meskipun keberadaan negara itu di peringkat antarabangsa. Malaysia tidak akan meminda peta sempadan maritim dan tetap mempertahankan kawasan dan kedaulatan negara di Laut Cina Selatan.